In Valheim, there are 10 weapon types to choose from. 7 melee types, with axes, clubs, knives, and swords, with some coming dual-handed and others single-handed, as well as fists, spears, and polearms. The other 3 types I do classify as ranged in the bows or crossbows, magic staffs, and finally bombs. You can review a weapon's stats by hovering over the item in your inventory. You will see its characteristics such as block armor, parry bonus, and most importantly, the amount and type of damage it does amongst other attributes. Do not worry, I will explain each of these in detail throughout the video, starting with damage. Damage in Valheim takes primarily 4 forms, of which in this video we will cover the first 2. The first is physical damage, which can come in the forms of blunt, pierce, or slash, and second, elemental damage that comes in the form of fire, frost, poison, spirit, or lightning. The reason damage type is relevant in Valheim is that all creatures have their own strengths and weaknesses. These are characterized by their tenacity tier, which can range from 0 to immune for each damage type. While creatures will be neutral to most forms of damage, others will be strong or weak based on their tenacity. 0 tenacity for very weak, receiving 200% increased damage. 1 for weak, receiving 150% more damage. 2 is neutral, receiving the base 100% damage. 3 for resistant, receiving 50% less damage. And 4 for very resistant, receiving 75% reduced damage. And lastly, a creature can be immune to a type of damage altogether. In fact, to give you a sneak peek, here is a breakdown of the number of creatures by their tenacity, groups, immune on top, resistant in the middle, and weak on bottom. We will revisit these numbers as I cover my recommended weapons later in the video, but spoiler alert, with 20 creatures immune to spirit, you're unlikely to see spirit weapons on my list. Now, with a good foundation on the mechanics of weapons and damage, let's dive into our first class of melee weapons in axes. Axes primarily do slash damage, with 8 currently in the game, 6 being single-handed and 2 being dual-handed. The single-handed axes have a 3-attack combo, with the 3rd attack doing the most damage, as well as a secondary attack by using the middle mouse button to swing the axe downward. You can acquire the stone and flint axe in the Meadows, the bronze axe in the Black Forest, iron in the Swamp, black metal in the Plains, and Jotunbane in the Mistlands. Jotunbane is unique in that in addition to slash damage, it also inflicts poison on your foes. Two-handed weapons alternatively require more stamina, are slower to swing, and most of them reduce your movement speed by 20% compared to 5 from single-handed. That said, two-handed weapons compensate in 3 ways by giving you increased block armor, block force, and knockback, illustrated by comparing the axes acquired in the swamp in the iron axe and the battle axe. For your information, block armor is the amount of damage absorbed when blocking, block force is how much an enemy is knocked back when blocked, and knockback is how far an enemy is knocked back when hit with your weapon. Like their one-handed counterparts, two-handed axes have their own 3-attack combo, with the 3rd attack dealing the most damage as well as having its own secondary attack. You will acquire the battle axe from the swamp and the crystal battle axe in the mountains. Like Jotunbane, the Crystal Battle Axe does elemental damage, but in this case, spirit damage. However, as mentioned previously, many creatures are immune to spirit damage, as illustrated with this Great Orc Brute. Two-handed axes are also noteworthy in that their secondary attack is one of the best attacks at staggering enemies. Enemies are staggered when a creature reaches their stagger limit, or they are successfully parried, and when staggered, they take double the damage. Before moving on to clubs, I will include the key stats for all the axes side by side for you to compare, including their damage per second values, as well as their maximum and minimum damage based on the number of upgrades applied to your weapon. To illustrate, the stone axe has a base slash damage of 15 without upgrades and 30 when fully upgraded. I will include a graphic like this after each weapon class going forward. Clubs primarily do blunt damage with 9 in the game, 6 single-handed and 3 dual-handed. Like most single-handed weapons, clubs have a 3-attack combo with the 3rd attack doing the most damage and an uppercut secondary attack. The first 2 one-handed clubs can be acquired in the Meadows in the Club and Torch, the Bronze Mace in the Black Forest, Iron Mace in the Swamp, Frostnir in the Mountains, and Porcupine in the Plains. Pay special attention to these 2 clubs as I expect you will be hearing about them again later in this video. The Frostnir stands out as in addition to blunt, this weapon does both frost and spirit damage, while the Porcupine is notable for it does pierce damage in addition to blunt. Unlike single-handed, the dual-handed clubs don't have a 3-attack combo, but exclusively have a single AoE slam attack and no secondary attack. The slam makes these weapons untouchable at handling large groups of enemies. You can get your first dual-handed club in the Stagbreaker in the Meadows, the Iron Sledge from the Swamp, and the Demolisher in the Mistlands. Next up are swords, but before that, check out the side-by-side comparison of each of the clubs. Swords primarily do slash damage, with 6 swords currently in the game, 5 of which are single-handed with 1 dual-handed. Single-handed swords, like axes, have a 3-attack combo pattern, with the 3rd attack doing the most damage with a stabbing secondary attack. Your first sword is acquired in the Black Forest in the Bronze Sword, followed by the Iron Sword in the Swamp, Silver in the Mountains, Black Metal in the Plains, and the Mistwalker in the Mistlands. The Silver and Mistwalker swords are notable in that they do spirit and frost damage respectively in addition to slash. The only two-handed sword is from the Mistlands in the Crom. The Crom brings the highest flat slash damage of all the swords and its own 3-attack combo and secondary attack. Whether this sword makes the list as one of my recommended weapons, you will have to wait and see, but I think we can all agree it is badass. Check out how Valheim swords match up against one another. Spears do pierce damage with 6 currently in the game, all of which are single-handed. Unlike most weapon types, they do not have an attack combo, and what sets them apart from other weapons is their secondary attack. The secondary attack allows you to throw the spear at an enemy to be picked up from the ground following the attack. You can craft your first spear in the Meadows with the Flint Spear, followed by the Bronze Spear in the Black Forest, the Ancient Bark Spear from the Swamp, and one of the 2 exclusive weapons to the Oceans biome in the Abyssal Harpoon. The Harpoon is not like other items on this list, and in some ways is hardly a weapon at all. The Harpoon is primarily used for hauling a serpent to shore and capturing enemies to be tamed like the boar. I do not recommend using this in combat. The other 2 are the Fang Spear from the mountains and the Carapace Spear in the Mistlands. Personally, I do not recommend using spears in general. They deal poorly with hitting enemies at different elevations. The most frustrating example of this is when dealing with spawners such as the body piles and sunken crypts. It's dang near impossible to hit them as they sit at a slightly lower elevation than the player. However, if you still want to give spears a try, review them side by side to determine the best one for you. Polearms are crowd pleasers due to their wide range and badass aesthetic and are actively one of, if not my favorite weapon class. They primarily do pierce damage, but there are only 4 currently in Valheim. While they are all two-handed, they only reduce your movement speed by 5%. They have a 3-attack combo with the 3rd attack doing the most damage and a secondary spinning attack hitting any enemy within its radius, and hitting with 6 times increased staggering, making for a great tool for dealing with a swarm of enemies. You can get the Bronze Akir in the Black Forest, Iron Akir in the Swamp, the Black Metal Akir in the Plains, and the Himanoffel in the Mistlands, which combines lightning damage with the typical pierce. The Himanoffel is special in that it is the only item in the game to deal lightning damage. Take a moment to compare the polearms side by side before we dive into what I consider to be the most fun weapon class. Knives do equal slash and pierce damage, and there are only 5 in the game, with only one of them being two-handed. The single-handed knives have the same 3-attack combo, with the 3rd attack doing the most damage, with a leaping secondary attack allowing you to quickly close distance with your enemies. You will acquire your first knife in the Meadows with the Flint Knife, Copper, Abyssal, and Silver knives from the Black Forest, Ocean, and Mountains respectively, and the dual-wielding daggers in the Skull and Hattie in the Mistlands. The Skull and Hattie also have a 3-attack combo and leaping secondary attack with a slightly different animation. What truly sets daggers apart from most other weapon classes is that they do not come with a movement speed reduction. Plus, they offer significant parry and backstab bonuses compared to other weapon classes. I'll explain the backstab and parry mechanics briefly. First, the backstab multiplier on your weapon is the damage multiplier you receive when hitting an enemy unaware of your presence, regardless of if you are in front, on the side, or behind the enemy. Unfortunately, after backstabbing an enemy, they cannot be backstabbed a second time. Second, contrary to popular belief, the parry bonus does not correspond to the bonus damage you do to a parried enemy, but rather it acts as a multiplier to your weapon's block armor rather than damage. In the instance of the Skull and Hattie, by timing a block precisely, you will parry and apply a stagger effect to the enemy, and you will get 4 times the block armor of 24, allowing you to absorb 96 damage when parrying. A parried enemy will always only take 2 times the base damage regardless of the weapon. If you like being sneaky and fast like I do, this is the weapon class for you. Check out our comparison of all the daggers. The final melee class is the Fists class with only one weapon in the Flesh Rippers, which are crafted from material from the mountain's frost caves. They have a 2-attack combo and a secondary attack and a kick to knock back foes and apply 6 times staggering. They do slash damage and function like daggers with significant parry and backstab bonuses in an absence of movement speed reduction. Moreover, they have the highest parry bonus of any weapon in the game at 6 times. Combine the Flesh Rippers with the set bonus from the full Fenris armor set for a heck of a combination. Before moving on to the ranged weapon types, I have summarized each of the melee weapon types and assigned pros and cons to each to help you differentiate between them, aiding in your choosing the type that best suits your playstyle. The first are bows and crossbows, of which we have 5. 4 bows and a single crossbow. Bows require arrows, of which there are 11 types that you will unlock recipes for as you progress the game, each dealing increasing amounts of pierce damage. Fire, silver, poison, and frost arrows are the exception, adding fire, spirit, poison, and frost damage respectively. The first bow is unlocked in the Meadows in the Crude Bow, followed by the Finewood Bow in the Black Forest, Huntsman Bow in the Swamp, the Draugr Fang in the Mountains, and lastly, the Spine Snap in the Mistlands. A bow's accuracy is based upon how long you draw back on it before firing, and its damage is dependent on the bow, draw time, and the arrows you are using. For For maximum damage and accuracy, pull the bow as far back as you can. My recommended bow is the Draugr Fang, beating out the Spine Snap due to its reduced stamina cost to draw back, being 10 seconds compared to the 14 of the Spine Snap. In addition, the Spine Snap does useless spirit damage compared to poison from the Draugr. The Arbalest Crossbow functions differently from bows in that it has a reload time rather than a stamina draining drawback. Once loaded, you can launch one of the 4 tiers of bolts simultaneously, doing major damage to your foe. As always, check out my side-by-side comparison of all bows and crossbows to choose the best one for you. With the Mistlands, magic and staffs were introduced to Valheim with 2 genres of magic. The first being elemental magic, giving us the Staff of Embers and the Staff of Frost. The Staff of Embers consumes Iter to launch a fireball, dealing major fire and blunt damage. Remember, you'll need to have eaten at least one of the 3 Iter generating foods to gain an Iter bar to permit spell casting. Alternatively, the Staff of Frost fires a short-range barrage of icicles, dealing frost damage. By increasing your elemental damage skill, you will increase the damage done by these staffs and decrease the amount of Iter used to cast a spell. The second magic type is Blood Magic, wielded by the Staff of Protection and Dead Razor. First, the Staff of Protection consumes both a percentage of your health and Iter to summon a protective bubble around you and allies, absorbing incoming damage for a time. The amount of damage absorbed increases and the required health and Iter to cast is reduced as you level your blood magic skill. Second, the Dead Razor again consumes both health and Iter to summon tamed skeletons to fight for you, and they can even be named. Again, like the Staff of Protection, this will be improved by leveling up the blood magic skill. Check them out side by side before reviewing our final ranged weapon class in bombs. There are 2 tossable grenade type weapons in the Bile and Ooze bombs, each of which can do impact and AoE damage, which are great for dealing with large quantities of foes. Review them side by side before we get into our long-awaited weapon recommendations. As you might expect, my top 3 recommended weapons are all endgame weapons, and for that reason, I want to nominate 5 earlier game honorable mentions that I recommend you use while progressing your game. First is the Stag Breaker. The Stag Breaker stands out in the early game for its excellent crowd control capabilities and significant damage relative to others for the Meadows biome. Second is the Abyssal Razor. The Abyssal Razor delivers excellent damage in the early game and stands out with its damage being comparable to even the Silver Knife, despite being obtainable as soon as the Black Forest. Third are the Flesh Rippers. Like the Abyssal Razor, these function like daggers with immense speed and high parry and backside bonuses. I love these as you compare them with my favorite armor in the Fenris armor for an additional bonus with a boost to your fists skill. Fourth is the Frostner. The Frostner is your first access to frost damage, which is massively useful as it slows down your enemies, giving you more time to maneuver. Plus, it does great damage for the biome. And fifth is the Porcupine. I like the Porcupine as, unlike the other clubs, it does pierce damage in addition to blunt, giving you much more flexibility with enemy creatures it will have effectiveness against. And now, what you have all been waiting for, let me reveal my top 3 weapon recommendations, starting with number 3. The Mist Walker. This was a tight race between it and the Crom, but with both dealing slash damage, I chose the Mist Walker for its diversity by adding both frost and spirit damage, leading to a total higher DPS. If you remember the tenacity graph from the beginning of the video, creatures are going to have resistances and sometimes immunity to different damage types. Having a weapon like the Mist Walker increases the likelihood that your weapon can be effective against any creature. The only argument to be made against the Mist Walker is the useless spirit damage it does, but considering its small contribution to the total damage, I decided to look the other way. Number 2. The Staff of Embers. With the highest base damage in the game, I cannot overlook this weapon, dealing 120 in both blunt and fire damage. Fire damage is the most common damage type creatures are weak to in Valheim with a whopping 12 creatures. Plus, blunt is the least resisted of the physical damage types with only 9, furthering its case as number 2 on this list. With all that said, the beauty of the magic staffs is that you can combine them. I would recommend that when using magic, use all 4 staffs together. You can quickly summon skellies, apply a protection bubble, and then quickly switch back and forth between the Ember and Frost staffs for great diverse gameplay. Magic is a blast to play with, so I encourage you to check it out when you reach the Mistlands. And number 1, my overall best weapon in Valheim is the Him and Awful. Despite it not having the best overall DPS compared to weapons like the Carapace Spear, Mistwalker, or Crom, it does both pierce and lightning. Few creatures have pierce resistances outside of the swamp, which contains a third of the total 13 creatures with pierce resistance. Plus, 0 creatures creatures in the game have resistance to lightning, making this item stand out. On top of that, with it being a polearm, it provides outstanding reach, massive stagger potential, as well as effectiveness against both single targets and groups of enemies with its secondary attack.
The Ashlands is here, and with it, 33 brand new weapons and a new mechanic allowing you to infuse many of them with one of 3 powerful elemental gemstones. In this video, I will share everything there is to know about each new weapon and tell you which I think are best for tackling the Ashlands with my personal top 3. Let's dive in. In total, 6 new melee weapons, 4 new staves, 2 bombs, and a new bow and crossbow can now be part of your arsenal. However, where this update truly shines is the new ability to add one of 3 elemental powers to your weapons with the blue eyelight, green jade, and red bloodstone. The blue eyelight adds 10 passive lightning damage to your weapon of choice, but also delivers a 25% chance with every hit to trigger chain lightning, crushing large groups of enemies. The green jade adds both 10 passive poison damage over time and a 20% chance to loot your enemies, completely immobilizing them for a short period, allowing you time to get in some free hits. And the red bloodstone adds 0.2% additional damage for each health you are missing. Important to emphasize here that damage is only increased with missing health. Keeping your health low by not eating food will not increase the damage output. These effects will be the same no matter which weapon type you infuse with the gem. But keep in mind that only Ashland's weapons can take advantage of the gemstones, with 5 of the melee weapons and both the bow and crossbow. Weapons from previous biomes, the 4 staves, as well as the special flame sword Dyrnwyn, cannot be upgraded with gems. More on this badass fire sword a little later. I will share which of these powers I think is best later in the video, but first, the 3 gemstones can be found within fortresses across the biome. Inside both exterior and secondary walls, there will be charred chests, with each having a random chance to spawn any one of the 3 gems. To get the full potential out of your weapons and ultimately augment them with the gemstones, you will need to craft both the Black Forge upgrades and the metal and gem cutters, bringing your Black Forge to level 5. With the Black Forge upgraded, we can now enhance our weapons, which I will demonstrate by converting the first new weapon in the single-handed sword Nidhogg to its bloodstone alternate in the Nidhogg the Bleeding. To do so, first craft the base weapon, which will be combined with flame metal and the red bloodstone, consuming the base Nidhogg for the Nidhogg the Bleeding. It's important to note here that regardless of the upgrade level of your base level Nidhogg, you will always get the quality level 1 of the enhanced version of it when combined with the gemstone. For this reason, if looking to craft any of the enhanced versions of these weapons, save your resources and hold off on upgrading the base weapon. With the new mechanics out of the way, let's take a look at each of these weapons in action, starting with the Nidhogg. Nothing out of the ordinary here, with the expected standard single-handed sword mechanics mirroring that of the one-handed swords before it, but with the added benefit of the gemstones should you choose one of those versions. On screen are the full stats, crafting, and upgrade costs for both the base Nidhogg, as well as its alternate gem versions in the Bleeding, Thundering, and Primal for you to digest. I will include a table like this for each of the weapon classes as we go through them, as well as a full summary at the end. Second is the Slayer, being the second greatsword introduced to the game, behind the Mistlands Crom, which its attack patterns it shares. While the Brutal, Scourging, and Primal all look badass, just like its Mistlands counterpart, the Greatsword falls short in its limited attack speed, as did the Crom before it. However, it does stand out, dealing significant damage and having higher block armor and force compared to most other melee weapons. Third is the Flametal Mace and its transformed versions in the Bludgeon, Storm, and Clawson. Like maces before it, this weapon stands out for its vicious blunt damage, large knockback capabilities, especially from its secondary uppercut attack, combined with its quick attack speed, making for an excellent option for melee enjoyers. Fourth introduces a brand new weapon class in dual-wielded axes in the Berzerkir and its augmented variations in the Bleeding, Thundering, and Primal. In my opinion, this weapon is the spiritual dagger for this biome, providing a quick 3-attack combo, with the 3rd attack hitting with both axes combined in addition to a lunging secondary attack mimicking that of daggers. These things are awesome, and you just might see this weapon in my recommendations later in the video. The final new melee weapon introduced outside of the Dyrnwyn is the new Splitnir Spear. While spears are far from my favorite weapon class in Valheim, the Bleeding, Storming, and Primal versions are nothing to scoff at. These spears deliver effective range and rapid attack speed as those before them, combined with the signature secondary attack with the Spear Toss. However, like spears before them, they do not have a 3-attack combo and therefore miss out on the double damage yielded by the 3rd hit, unlike most other melee weapons. That said, their rapid jabbing attack speed means a higher chance of proccing the chain lightning or root power from the storming and primal versions of this weapon. There might be some potential here. As for ranged weapons, first is the Ash Bow, converted to the Blood, Storm, and Root classifications, and is my personal favorite ranged weapon, acting with increased attack speed compared to crossbows. One thing you might miss with this bow is that once upgraded to a quality of 2, the Ash Bow also receives a small amount of spirit damage in addition to the pierce. The gemstone versions of this bow will also keep the spirit damage. Speaking of crossbows, next is the Ripper being converted to the Wound, Storm, and Root versions. While slower than the Ash Bow, the crossbow delivers significant damage but is slowed down by a short reload time between shots. Be careful while reloading, as dodging or sprinting will reset the reload animation. Likewise, unequipping the crossbow also unloads the weapon. On the bright side, unlike the bow, you don't consume stamina with each shot, and it is effectively hit scan. Use this to snipe enemies at a long distance. Both bows and crossbows also did receive new ammunition in the Charred Arrow and Bolt respectively. Before reviewing the 2 new bombs and incredible staves, as promised, here's the full list of melee and ranged weapons with their stats, crafting, and upgrade costs for you to enjoy. Keep in mind while reviewing this list that the max achievable level for your Black Forge is only 5, and similarly, the Guldur table's current max is 4, limiting the power we can get from the staves, as we will cover shortly. We will have to wait to the deep north to witness the full power of these weapons. The first bomb in Basalt are useless in combat, but allow us to reach Flametal in lava pits. When thrown atop lava, they will harden, creating a platform to navigate to the Flametal columns safely. Second are the smoke bombs. Like the Basalt, have no purpose in combat, but can be used to extinguish fires when your wooden home inevitably catches fire in the fiery biome. And perhaps most importantly are the fantastic 4 new staves. Unlike the melee and ranged weapons, staves are crafted at the Guldur table. To get the most out of the staves, upgrade your Guldur table to level 4 with the Feathery Wreath. However, unlike the previous weapons, the staves cannot be augmented with gemstones, but considering their powerful and unique abilities, you won't have need to. Starting with the Staff of Fracturing, this staff uses elemental magic to act like a grenade launcher, but the grenade, after a slight delay, fractures into smaller explosives. Weirdly, I have found it does not do the type of AoE damage you would expect, and I would certainly recommend its use for single target damage. In my opinion, this is the least exciting of the new staves, but could be powerful if fire damage is your preferred choice. Second is the Staff of the Wild, which allows you to do your best Elder impression and summon roots just like the Black Forest boss. Like the Elder, the summoned roots are stationary and will attack any within their reach, dealing blunt and poison damage, but also have a small chance to root enemies, similar to that of the Jade Gemstone power. There is no limit on the number of roots you can summon, provided you have the available Iter. The roots have no health bar, cannot be destroyed, but will despawn after roughly 20 seconds. Before my favorite staff of this patch, we have our third staff in the Dundr. This staff has been affectionately referred to by the Valheim developers as a magic shotgun excelling in close quarters combat. This staff uses elemental magic to fire short-range bursts of lightning. After every shot, however, the staff effectively has a cooldown or Iter-consuming reload. Remember, rolling or sprinting does interrupt the reload while still consuming the 44 Iter. Fortunately, like a shotgun, this weapon has a ton of kick, knocking both you and your enemy backwards, providing you space and time to recharge the staff. And the fourth and personal favorite of mine is the Trollstav. This is the only blood magic staff added in this update and therefore requires both health and Iter to use, but like its name suggests, allows you to summon up to 2 fire trolls to fight alongside you. And just look at that summon animation, incredible! The summon animation also does massive damage. Consider using it to destroy groups of enemies or assist in destroying resource nodes like the massive rocks in the plains to accelerate your resource gathering. Apart from that, these trolls are beasts in combat and will attract a ton of attention. However, do tread carefully, as these trolls are allied to nobody but each other, and once done with your foes, will seek you out next. And lastly, before we get into my recommendations, check out my full table of staff stats and crafting costs as I prepare to show you how to uncover the elusive Dyrnwyn sword. This sword requires 3 sword fragments to be gathered, of which only 1 of each exists per server. For that reason, you will have to fight your server buddies for the right to craft this, as there can only be 1. To find the 3 fragment locations, you will have to dive into putrid holes and find the Vedfisir runestones, of which each will mark one of 3 mysterious locations on your map. At each location, you will find a unique stone structure protected by 2-star versions of the Charred and a spawner. After defeating the Charred, 2 of the locations will have altars with a sword fragment for claiming, while the 3rd will require you to dig, finding the entrance to Lord Rito's lair, this biome's mini-boss. Defeat him for the 3rd and final sword fragment, enabling you to craft this weapon. This sword looks badass both in your hand and on your back, but unfortunately, despite its higher damage than the Nidhogg, it has trouble competing with the powerful perks added by augmenting the other melee weapons with gemstones. That said, if fire is your thing, don't hesitate to give it a shot. And with all the Ashland's weapons covered, it's time I share my absolute top 3. But first, to justify my choices, I must rank the 3 gemstone powers from 3 to 1. Coming in third place is the Bloodstone, as you need to lose 50 health just to equal the 10 elemental damage provided by the Jade and Iolite gems by default. Further, the Bloodstone doesn't deliver an additional perk like the Immobilize and Chain Lightning, and for that reason you won't see any blood weapons on my list. Perhaps if this weapon had lifesteal, like many had speculated before the Ashlands launch, it could be viable. Second place lands with the Jade Root ability, as the Immobilize chance can sometimes be the difference between life and death, especially when dealing with large menacing enemies like the Morgan or Valkyrie. However, what hurts the Jade Gem is the additional damage being poison. With many of the enemies in the Ashlands being undead, they are either resistant or immune altogether to poison damage, hurting the overall impact of Jade infused weapons. And in first place, without a doubt, the most powerful gemstone is the Iolite, with the added lightning damage being excellent in the Ashlands, with 0 creatures having resistance to it, plus it excels against the mighty Morgan. Furthermore, the chance of Chain Lightning can save your life when swarmed by enemies. And with that understood, these are my top 3 Ashlands weapons, starting with number 3, the Root Fang. When it comes to choosing bows or crossbows, it's an easy choice for me with the increased fire rate of the bow, which is only magnified with the addition of the immobilizing effect chance by the infused Jade Gemstone. Ranged weapons thrive when they can keep their targets at a distance, where the immobilizing effect certainly stands out. The more hits you get, the more chances you have for the root effect to proc, which furthers my case in favor of the Ash over the Ripper. The biggest downside here is the damage dealt being poison and pierce. Many of the Ashlands enemies are skeletal and or undead, leaving them either resistant or immune to the damage dealt by this bow. Number 2 is the Stormstar Mace. The mace stands out for its quick attack speed and significant knockback for a one-handed weapon. Furthermore, due to the rapid attack speed, you can expect an increased chance of proccing the Chain Lightning, crushing the undead horde. Plus, unlike my first choice, this weapon is single-handed, allowing you to pair a shield with it for added protection. And before revealing my top 3 weapons for this biome, I want to share 2 honorable mentions for the spellcasters out there, the Trollstav and Staff of the Wild. In general, the new staffs added in the Ashlands update are underwhelming, considering most of the time I prefer the Mistlands staffs over the new ones introduced. That said, it's hard to compete with having 1 or even 2 fire trolls fighting alongside you. Plus, the ability to absolutely crush giant structures never gets old. Second, while the Staff of the Wild was initially underwhelming in the public test branch, feedback was heard by the community and this staff got a huge buff. Now, its massive damage and awesome chance to root your enemies is a fantastic crowd control tool in any mage's toolkit. And without further ado, my absolute number 1 choice of Ashland's weapons is without a doubt the Thundering Berzerkir Axes. Like the mace before it, the axes excel in both attack speed, but unlike the mace, do slash damage and have reduced knockback. The reduced knockback is preferable for me, as I like to keep my enemies close to take them down quickly. The biggest downside of these axes is that they are dual-handed, not allowing for the addition of a shield for added protection. That said, my preference is to dodge rather than block, and for that reason, missing the shield is no big deal for me. The axe's attack speed and reliable slash and lightning damage makes it stand out as a single best choice on your Ashen quest. The first and absolute last of this weapon class you will find on my list is the Flint Spear. Spears are my least favorite weapon class in Valheim, but the benefits of using this in the early game cannot be ignored for the following 3 reasons. 1, it is cheap. It costs far fewer leather scraps than the crude bow, but still provides you range capabilities with its secondary attack. Use the spear throw to hunt deer for their hide rather than the expensive bow. 2, the vertical drop-off of the ranged attack is more consistent than the bow once you get comfortable with it. Plus, it fires more accurately than the crude bow, which tends to veer to the left of where you're targeting. And third, it has incredible attack speed and pierce-dealing damage, making it viable beyond the Meadows into Valheim's second biome, the Black Forest. And speaking of pierce damage, to effectively evaluate the best weapon in the upcoming biomes, we first need to understand damage and creature resistances before we can proceed. First, there are 8 types of damage we need to concern ourselves within Valheim. 3 physical in Pierce, Blunt, and Slash, and 5 elemental in Fire, Frost, Poison, Lightning, and Spirit. Second, most creatures in Valheim will have resistances to damage types, taking reduced damage from them, as well as weaknesses, receiving increased damage from those types. Each weapon in your arsenal will deal 1 or many of these damage types, of which you can determine by inspecting your weapon. In choosing our preferred weapon in the biomes going forward, we will consider the creature's strengths and weaknesses and match our preferred weapon to take advantage of them. And with that out of the way, let's dive into the Black Forest. With the acquisition of bronze, you should craft the first of my favorite weapon class in Valheim in Polearms with the bronze Aegir. This weapon class absolutely crushes with its massive pierce damage, long reach, and overpowered secondary spinning attack. The Grey Dwarf clan that inhabit this biome will look to swarm you, and the Aegir secondary attack allows you to hit multiple targets at the same time, with the bonus of neutralizing them with applied stagger. That said, where this weapon truly shines is against the first true threat in Valheim in the Troll. Trolls are weak to the pierce damage dealt by the Aegir, and further, you can easily stagger lock them with the secondary attack. Hit them with the attack, wait for them to wind up their next, and hit them with it again. Alternatively, while we will not cover the ocean biome specifically, progressing to the Black Forest unlocks the capability to craft a boat and take to the sea. If you are lucky and discover a Leviathan, you can mine their chitin and craft the Abyssal Razor. This weapon is absolutely busted for the Black Forest as it deals damage comparable to the Iron class of weapons, only obtainable by progressing into the dangerous swamp. This dagger, like the flint before it, does both slash and pierce, allowing us to still take advantage of the troll's weakness, but also allows us to avoid the pierce resistance of the skeletons in the burial chambers due to it also dealing slash damage. Further, daggers are unique in that they have twice the backstab bonus for other weapon classes, meaning they deal 6 times their damage when hitting unaware targets. Simply sneak up on a troll and absolutely devastate them. Summarizing the Black Forest before heading into the swamp, it's safe to say that either the Aegir or Razor will lead you to success in this biome. Unlike the previous region, blunt damage sets itself apart in the swamp, with our #1 choice being the Iron Mace. Of all the creatures in the biome, we have very few weaknesses to work with, except for the blobs and oozers, both being weak to blunt damage. The 2 exceptions to this rule being the Night-Crawling Wraith and Spooky Abomination. In these cases, you will want to avoid blunt and pierce damage and look for elemental damage when you can, or at least slash damage, like from an axe in the case of the Walking Stump. All that said, the best part of the Iron Mace is how powerful it is against the biome's boss in Bone Mass. Unlike most other bosses in the game, this boss has a weakness to both blunt and frost damage. For this reason, the Iron Mace will absolutely terrorize the giant green menace. In short, you can't go wrong with the Iron Mace in this biome. Moving to the mountains, this biome introduces the first ranged weapon as my preferred choice with the Draugr Fang Bow. This biome contains the first airborne creature in Valheim in addition to a flying boss. Like the Drake, Motor also enjoys a nice trip into the sky. Further, you will want to keep your distance from the lethal wolf pack. It is my preference to use stealth against these bad doggos as much as possible, often one-shotting them with a single arrow when unaware of your presence. The strength of this weapon extends inside the frost caves, as both cultists and ools have a weakness to poison. The added poison damage of the Fang will melt these enemies. All that said, if determined to force melee weapons, any of the Iron class weapons will do, and with silver acquired, you cannot go wrong with the Frostner. The Frostner is very likely the most well-rounded weapon in all of Valheim, dealing blunt, frost, and spirit damage. In addition, you should not underrate the added benefit of the slow effect applied by the mace. As I alluded to in the open, you might just see the Frostner referenced again as we proceed into the most difficult biomes the game has to offer. The Plains allows us to return to the best weapon class with the Black Metal Aegir. Like the bronze before it, offers the same benefits of the pierce damage, great range, stagger, and a powerful secondary attack. In the case of the Plains, it allows us to handle the horde of fueling with its spinning attack. Further, the Mighty Locks having resistance to blunt and slash physical damage with the pierce of the Aegir breaking through their thick fur coats. However, before acquiring the black metal for the Aegir, the Frostner is a good option, enabling control of the swarm of fueling with the slowing freeze effect. Plus, unlike the pierce damage of the Aegir, the paralyzing growths from tar pits, while resistant to pierce damage, are weak to both frost and blunt, making the Frostner best for dealing with them. Unfortunately, the Loxodon's resistance to blunt and frost neutralizes this weapon. In this case, bow and arrow might be the way to go, which leads me to my sleeper pick for the biome in the Huntsman Bow. In my opinion, the best approach for conquering fueling villages is with a bow, picking off one fueling at a time, in which the Huntsman stands out for its reduced attack noise. The attack noise takes effect when hitting a target. Hitting a creature will alert all others within its attack noise radius. Most bows have an attack noise of 15 meters, while the Huntsman is reduced to only 4. For this reason, you can snipe fueling without alerting others more easily. Likewise, this works well for attacking locks, normally found in groups of 3. There is nothing worse than fighting multiple enemies at once in Valheim, but the Black Metal Aegir will be there to cover your back when all else fails. With the introduction of the Mistlands, Valheim adds magic for the first time. For this reason, I will provide both my melee and magic recommendations for each biome going forward. First, the Mistwalker stands out for the melee enjoyers, like the Frostner before it, but dealing slash rather than blunt. The most common creatures in this biome are the Seeker and Seeker Soldier, both having resistance to all physical damage, making elemental damage king amongst the Mist. For this reason, the Mistwalker stands out, adding frost to its slash. The enemies in this biome will attack you quickly and attack you in numbers. Once again, the slowing effect of the frost damage sets us apart, allowing you to slow and outmaneuver your foes. Before getting the Mistwalker, the Frostner will once again be a good replacement. For the spellcasters out there, I may turn some heads with this choice, as the Staff of Frost is my go-to for the biome and in many ways may be the best weapon in the game. Like the Frostner and Mistwalker, it does frost damage, allowing you once again to slow your enemies, increasing your survivability. The only downside of this weapon is its range being quite short, but trust me, the Seekers, Soldiers, and Ticks will not hesitate to get up close and personal. That said, the power of magic, in my opinion, is combining staffs together. My preferred approach is to summon a protective bubble with the Staff of Protection and use the Staff of Frost for short range and Embers for distant targets. In summary, pick the Mistwalker if melee is your preference, and Staff of Frost if spellcasting is more your style. The best weapon for the Ashlands biome is without a doubt the new weapon class in the Berzerkir Axes, and specifically the Thundering version for that sweet lightning damage and chain lightning proc chance. The Ashlands introduces a wide range of undead and skeletal creatures with high levels of resistance to pierce and poison damage, reducing the viability of those damage dealing weapons. Further, not a single creature is resistant to lightning, with even a couple being weak to the damage type. On top of that, the biggest spike in difficulty from the biome is the sheer quantity of enemies you will encounter. For this reason, the chance of chain lightning is invaluable in its ability to chain to various targets at once. However, before getting your hands on the new class of Ashland's weapons, the Mistwalker and once again, the timeless Frostner are great choices. Many of the biome's creatures are weak to spirit damage as provided by these two weapons, and again, the freezing effect provided by Frost will stand out. For the spellcasters out there, once again, the Staff of Frost for its freezing damage will be excellent for controlling the various mobs. As you progress the biome and unlock recipes for the new staves, I would personally recommend the Staff of the Wild. As mentioned, the difficulty of the biome comes from the number of creatures. This staff allows you to summon roots, attacking all nearby targets, allowing you to fight many enemies at once. Plus, the roots will have a chance to completely immobilize the enemies with the root proc effect. Overall, magic is king for the Ashlands in my experience, so get the Staff of the Wild as soon as you can, but if opting for melee, the Berzerkir Axes will tear your foes apart. Never sleep on the best overall weapon in the game, the Frostner.